Okay, so I have a semi-regular Dungeons & Dragons game with my friends, and one day my character became possessed and unplayable. This was entirely my own fault, a result of an action that could have easily been avoided, and one which I'm still mocked for to this day. As this was happening, coupled with the fact that I had to leave the party due to life concerns, I expressed my concern that my party would lose its tank, and my buddy Adam said this was fine because his barbarian was still there. And this made me think, what exactly is a tank? My argument was that his Path of the Beast Barbarian was less suited to tanking because, while he has high HP, his move pool consists of hitting something and then hitting it again, but this time with feeling. Meanwhile, my multi-classed Paladin Fighter with a third-party homebrew subclass, but no Paladin oath for plot reasons, has high HP and several reaction skills and bonus actions to assist with hitting things semi-hard while keeping other people safe. There is a lot more context for these characters, but I'll come back to them later. Let's start by looking at the closest thing to a dictionary definition that we have. The Wikipedia article for a tank class states that a tank, or meat shield, is a character class commonly seen in co-op video games. In most games with tank classes, 3 factors contribute to a tank's survivability. A large amount of health for absorbing damage mitigation, often accomplished through an armor or defense mechanic, the ability to avoid attacks altogether. Depending on the game, a tank may be any combination of these. I have no idea if this definition is accurate or not, so I think the best way to find out is to look at every example in video games that I can think of and draw whatever kind of conclusion we can out of it. This was the part of the video where I was going to talk to you about how World of Warcraft tanks work. Owing to the fact that it's a long-running game with multiple examples, a knowledgeable fanbase and more resources than I can swing my holy wrath at, but having only played 30 minutes of WoW in my life, and being frankly overwhelmed by the wiki page, I'm going to elect to use a different example. The critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV with expanded free trial, which you can play through the entirety of A Realm Reborn, and the award-winning Heavensward expansion, and the award-winning Stormblood expansion up to level 70 for free with no restriction on playtime, is a game I got stuck on for 6 months back in 2022. Final Fantasy XIV is a very good MMO which I highly recommend, with 4 tank classes: Warrior, Dark Knight, Gunbreaker, and Paladin. These classes share the same overall ideas but differ in execution. All of them have what's known as a tank stance, which generates enmity, or for the sake of simplicity, aggro over time, meaning that when you have it on, provided you're the main tank, you generate more aggro than the healer keeping you alive, and the DPS slapping the bad guys beefy behind. If my off-tank keeps their stance on one more fucking time, I swear to God, I will swap into a crafting class so I can cook up the feast of bullshit that they deserve. All tank classes also have their own flavour of mitigation skills, ranging from making you impervious to most attacks for 10 seconds, to making you so full of pure edge that you become unkillable, and hoping to idle in that your cooldowns finish so you can hit the guy and restore your health before your sheer iron will gives out and you drop dead. From this, we can assert that Final Fantasy XIV defines tanks as being able to do 2 main things: generate aggro, and reduce damage taken to players, particularly during higher-end content when they're responsible for mitigating damage for the entire party. These are consistent across the available classes and things that players get angry at Sprouts at for not using properly while they're learning the game, and if you do this, you're a bad person. The individual classes specialise in different things. For example, Paladin likes to pretend it's also a casting class, using Requiescat to give its unique spells 0 cast time and a buff which allows instant small healing or free damage. On top of this specialisation, Paladin has several skills for reducing the damage taken by other party members, either by sheer force of will, or by running really fast to stand between the healer, who generated too much aggro, and the big scary robot that decided they'd like a tasty snack. You've got Shield Lob to smack the target in the back of the head to remind them you're still here, so stop looking at the Dragoon, they're getting nervous. Intervene rushes the target and deals damage, a nice way to sprint across the battlefield to put yourself between the enemy and a white mage who's questioning every life decision that's led them to that point. I should point out that every tank class gets one of these, but Paladin gets theirs way later than everyone else, at level 74, so it wasn't until Shadowbringers that Paladins could dash. So I guess that cardio wasn't a priority until then. As for damage reductions, to self you have skills like Hallowed Ground that makes you impervious to most attacks for 10 seconds, and Passage of Arms which creates a cone behind you that your allies can stand in and take reduced damage while you block all damage to yourself. That's my favourite skill for flavour. Paladin's my main class, And the blend of blocking, casting and free damage is a nice balance for me and really makes you stand out at the front of a light party in your shiny armor, and okay, maybe I just like the aesthetic. The Dark Knight fulfills every Berserk's fan's dreams of giving you a big sword and an even bigger edge meter, more focused around allowing you to take the most damage possible without dying, and also swinging your massive sword like it's the cool stick you found on the hike that you can't bear to part with. I won't even start to try and explain the blood gauge, because I think its mere existence says more about the class than any words I could use to describe it. There's also plenty of abilities that deal straight damage as well as reducing damage to itself and allies. The one that everyone can't get enough of is Living Dead. Close to death? Use Living Dead. If your health drops to 0 while it's active, you simply don't die. Every subsequent attack restores HP to you, and if you manage to restore an amount of HP equivalent to your maximum life, you get to keep on trucking. If not, you die. For the love of God, please only use this when you're cooled down, otherwise you'll just die anyway and look like an idiot. When I asked my friend Pip to review this section of the video, I got yelled at for not mentioning Esteem. Your shadow simulacrum that you unlock at level 80, who's so edgy, he's made of literal darkness and the living embodiment of your own personal dark side. He also hits like one of those trucks with a skeleton painted on the side, so you can fit in your union-mandated brooding time even during a boss fight. Dark Knight does have a very small, Lalafell-sized handful of mitigation skills, but in the end it's mostly about hitting the enemy so hard and fast they can't not ignore you. Everyone else is a burden, and only you can defeat the evil inside of you. Pip also gave me a note about the Dark Knight, and I didn't really understand it, so I'm reading it out in hopes that a 14 player will know what I'm actually talking about. So here goes. Playstyle wise, Dark Knight is like 1, 2, 4, 3, 9, 7, 5, 2, 3, 8, 4, 9, 5, 3, 2, 4, 5 OGCDs during its burst, and then a basic 1, 2, 3 for the rest of the minute. Have fun working out what that means. Gunbreaker allows you to shoot things while you stab them. Case closed. But seriously, it's mostly focused on dealing damage with the added bonus that sometimes you can make things explode, which adds to your aggro generation by placing a flashing neon sign above you that says, "I've got a big ego, and if you'd like your sexual organs plastered on the other wall, you're more than welcome to try and ignore me." Looking at the ability list, there are mitigation skills like Heart of Light and Heart of Stone that reduce damage to itself or an ally. Super Bolide, which I hope to God I'm saying right, is your main one and reduces you to 1 HP and makes you impervious to most attacks. Commonly referred to as the "you can't kill me if I kill myself first" skill. There are some damage over time skills, some big damage skills, and a smattering of range skills, but on the whole I spent my time with Gunbreaker uttering one solitary syllable. It's fine, the mitigation is good and the damage is phenomenal, but most of the time you do feel like a DPS trying your hardest to fit in with the tanks, because Square Enix told you there were too many DPS classes already and the tanks needed a new friend. Finally, Warrior takes a different approach and maintains an equilibrium by restoring its own health immediately after losing any. You can become the healer's best friend by reducing their mana drain on you by giving yourself critical hits against the big scary monster like you have an IV drip of high elixirs and pure adrenaline pumping straight into your veins. Tapping into your inner beast, you can activate Berserk and grant yourself 3 free hits and crits, an interesting spike ability with Vengeance which reduces incoming damage and attacks back when you get hit, and Fell Cleave for as long as you satisfy your inner chihuahua by slapping the big bad over and over again. You can heal yourself in interesting ways. Thrill of Battle gets you so excited to swing your axe that you spontaneously gain more health and heal that much at the same time. Nascent Flash is one you can share with a party member that's appeased you somehow, allowing you both to heal every time you hit with a weapon skill, also reducing damage taken by 10% because you're just such a nice guy. Judging all these skill sets, we begin to see an overlap within the tank classes. Damage mitigation is common across all available classes. It's an important part of tanking, making you stick around for longer to continue being a threat. While not essential for some, the ability to have these mitigations transfer or be cast on party members adds some support for the overall team. Stopping a DPS from going down, for example, enables them to continue hitting and gives the healer time to focus on keeping them alive. All 4 tanks share the Provoke ability, a taunt of sorts that automatically puts you at the top of the aggro list on the off chance that you lose the enemy's attention, like by forgetting to put your tank starts on like a dope. Optional high damage is also good for aggro generation, just to remind the enemy that while you're dancing around like an idiot trying to get their attention, you're also an actual threat and you can hit like a truck when you need to. They all have some kind of ranged damage just to poke people from afar in case it's needed. It's never a high damage attack though, more of a safety net if something slips through your grasp while pulling a large amount of monsters in a dungeon or something. Is that enough Final Fantasy for you? Do you need a break to process all of that? Well, too bad, because it's time for more examples. League of Legends is the sweatiest game that you could possibly play, and you can quote me on that. I installed League just for this video, so you better appreciate it, and I hope to God that I get all this right. Tanks in League are split into two categories, Vanguards and Wardens. Vanguards are, on the whole, more focused on drawing attention through sheer power, whereas Wardens generally have more team buffs and stick around longer. Because I've never played this game before, I'm just going to pick a handful from this handy-dandy list of tanks and tell you why they're good. Starting with Vanguards, Alistair is literally the first one alphabetically, so you can really tell how lazy I am. Alistair is a good old-fashioned Minotaur that really wants to hit and hit hard. You even get healed for hitting things. His innate ability Triumphant Roar stacks with every stun or displacement you cause someone else, so it's a good thing all his other abilities do these things. At 7 stacks you get the heal you will no doubt need by this point. His arsenal also consists of a dash attack and trample, which has to be charged fully to actually stun. Alistair's ultimate reduces damage taken for 7 seconds based on his ability level as well. A nice aggressive tank moveset. Hit and keep hitting hard with buffs for extra effects, gap closures, and AoE for maximum potential and damage reduction, all wrapped up in one nice half-man, half-bull package. I picked Leona next because she's got a big shield. No other reason. Leona functions a bit differently, preferring to mark enemies, making you do more damage to them. She can buff her armor and magic resistance by up to 50%, an attack buff, and a dash that can stick enemies in place, allowing you to pound them into an even finer pace than you could previously. Her ultimate allows you sight through the fog, damaging enemies in the radius of the effect, and also slowing or stunning them the closer they are to the center. A slight mix-up, a little less aggressive than Alistair, but with some utility for allies as well. Leona can have grudge matches with the enemy champion if she wants, keeping them nearby so she can wail on them, or let them have it if they try to retreat. Get solar flared, idiot. Essentially, enemies won't have time to defend or go after allies if they can't physically get away from Leona. Rammus is a turtle. That's all the flavor text I have. A third angle of tanking is at play here, the fully armored tank. Rammus gets more basic damage the more armor he has, allowing him to tank hits and clap back. Defensive Ball Curl buffs his armor and magic resistance while also doing damage to enemies that try and hit him. His signature dash, Power Ball, turns him into Sonic the Hedgehog, and if he hits you, you'll probably die. If not, you'll get stunned and slowed. This is the first instance of a taunt ability I've seen so far, and it works. Forcing the target to attack Rammus while giving him a movement speed buff, Rammus's ultimate allows him to get up close and personal with the action, launching himself across the map, slowing nearby enemies and hitting them with the shockwaves. Bonus points if you turn into Sonic first. In short, you give yourself armor by standing in place, drawing attention to yourself, and then charge off to the fight, dealing extra damage and drawing the enemy away from other allies or interrupting a fight in progress. Zac confuses me. I picked him because haha funny slime man, but I discovered an altogether different style of tanking which I lovingly refer to as I lived, bitch. Zac has the ability to split into 4 bloblets on death that if recombined restore him to between 10 and 50% of his max health. This is a little crazy. You basically draw aggro by fighting people until you die and then come back to fight them some more. There's an ability for tethering an enemy to you, keeping them close, an AoE, and a leap to stop people escaping. The balance to all this is it costs health to use abilities instead of mana or another resource. You're essentially killing yourself to tank, but it's okay. You can pick up the slime you drop to heal yourself. This is a first for me, and honestly, I kinda love it. Sacrificing health to keep enemies in combat range and covering distance to get into the fight, with the option to heal yourself back at the cost of an ability, safe in the knowledge that you have a pretty good chance of coming back if you die. Sounds like a good deal to me, and you can tank beyond death, which is my idea of a good time. Wardens mix up the playstyle a little bit, looking back at their allies and giving them a hand up rather than punching the other guy. Galio is a giant stone titan, and I kind of love him despite how derpy he looks in-game compared to his artwork. He can make some of his attacks uncancelable, create tornadoes, dash to opponents, and shield himself. Wide-ranging attacks, the ability to buff, taunt with his shield, and run towards the fight are all standard by this point, but Galio's ultimate does intrigue me. After charging, Galio leaps into the air before crashing down on an ally's location. This might sound counterintuitive, but Galio buffs all nearby allies with his shield ability as well as giving it to himself, becomes untargetable and damages nearby enemies. It's a perfect team buff, supporting teammates from the front, potentially providing much needed assistance at a time of need. In short, Galio can take a hit, dish it out, and help friends take hits too. Poppy is short. Side note, I do enjoy her lore. She's looking for a hero to wield the hammer she found without realizing she's actually the hero, which is kind of cute. She can hit you in the face with a shield, which is my kind of tactic. Slam her hammer onto the ground for an AoE, and a dash which carries enemies along with it. The biggest draw is her steadfast presence. While passive, it increases her armor and magic resistance, which is further boosted while she's under 40% of her max health. And while active, it buffs her speed and creates an aura which damages and slows enemies that dash into it. Her ultimate has a sluggish 4 seconds of time for a full charge, but deals high damage to nearby enemies, has massive knockback, and knocks enemies airborne, and reveals them to other players. Across the whole moveset, there's a ranged attack, AoE, and armor buff, topped off with a high damage knockback that also shows allies where the enemies are. By selecting random champions, I now fully understand what unbenching the Kench means. You learn something new every day. Tahm Kench is what appears to be a bayou frog monster who likes to eat. It's like someone watched Disney's Princess and the Frog and wrote a saucy fanfic between the prince and the alligator who produced an unholy love child who loves to make people's lives a living hell. His innate ability empowers his basic attacks and adds stacks to enemy champions, which give his other abilities extra effects. Tongue Lash slows an enemy champion while healing Kench, and Abyssal Dive is a different kind of dash that blinks into the target, dealing damage, knocking them up and stunning them, as well as refunding some of the mana used for the spell. Kench has a unique heal ability where he's able to store post-calculated damage as grey health, and if he's left alone for 4 seconds, he can convert it back into HP, or he can activate the ability to turn it into a shield for 2.5 seconds. His ultimate is also unique. Kench can swallow people. The utility in this is that you can swallow allies, which gives them a shield and buffs Kench's movement speed. This can be used to rescue allies, giving them time for their cooldowns to go off, or to retreat to safety, and they can even pick which direction they come out of his mouth. Using it against enemies slows Kench, but he does deal damage to the enemies he spits out. Again, here we have a ranged attack, modified dash, self-heal or buff, and a useful assist. Finally, we have Tarek, who looks like a generic pretty boy, and no, I don't understand his lore, and I don't even know how to say Demacia. Demacia? I have no idea. Tarek's innate ability empowers his next 2 basic attacks to deal more damage and execute faster, and also makes his cooldowns quicker. Starlight's Touch heals Tarek and nearby allies, depending on how many stacks his innate has. Dazzle allows him to ghost over to nearby units before unleashing a Starlight Beam, dealing magic damage and inflicting stun. Where the tanking really starts is Bastion passively generating bonus armor for Tarek, and it keeps him tethered to a nearby ally who also receives the same benefits, and if activated, both characters get a shield. Tarek can also self-cast if he has no friends. Last but not least, his ultimate, Cosmic Radiance, has a 2.5 second wind-up time before making Tarek and nearby allies invulnerable for another 2.5 seconds. You ever tank so hard you just don't die? While lacking some effects, Tarek does maintain a dash of sorts on top of a heal. His most used ability is his ultimate, though. Did I really write that? I don't know if I agree with that, actually. Maybe I needed another draft. Oh well. Take that with a pinch of salt. Alright, after the quickest possible rundown of 8 tanks in League, let's round it up. It's difficult to pin down common factors between all of these characters. Some have self-heals, some have dashes. I'll touch on how we'll sum these up in a moment, but the one thing linking them all together is their health pools. Health scales as you level, which in my mind gives me more incentive to grind out levels on minions to make me a better tank. The lowest of the selection of characters is Poppy's starting HP at 610, and the highest is Galio with 2774. Okay, but what about armor? It's a separate stat that deals with damage mitigation in a way that I didn't study enough maths at school to properly understand. It can be increased with items, but let's assume we're running these characters sub-optimally. Out of the highest armor scores at level 1, Alistair and Leona are number 1, with Tahm Kench 3rd, and Rammus and Tarek 4th. What's most interesting is that at cap, level 18, Rammus is 3rd highest, and Leona is 5th. Again, this is without items, but high armor is not always a focus for these characters. Their speed is also middling, so they aren't always slow, and unsurprisingly their damage output is also middling, but they're not meant to hit hard all the time, so don't worry about it. So far the only common factors we've found are middling speed and damage, but you didn't think I went into that much depth about their movesets for nothing, did you? While there is also nothing inherently consistent on the surface across all their move pools, there are common factors we can draw from. All these characters have what I like to call an arm's reach skill, meaning they have something to keep enemies within hitting distance. Some have charges, some have tethers, some just stop people from running away. Just keeping enemies within slapping distance allows you to generate some DPS, maybe not as much as your teammates, but it keeps them concentrated on you. You can kill, and some characters gain benefits from doing so, but it's usually not the main focus. Keep the enemy's eyes on you, and they won't see the assassin DPS coming up behind them. They also all have some kind of self-buff. This is the biggest stretch here, but stay with me. Lots of these characters have an armor buff, something to give them increased defense so they can take more hits. I would argue that self-healing falls into this category, as it serves the same purpose just by healing instead of buffing a skill. The purpose of a tank is to stick around for as long as possible, so by giving yourself the ability to stave off death for another couple precious seconds allows you to contribute to your team in the best way possible. Finally, they all have something to assist allies with. Now this is a big stretch for Alistair, but I'm coming to that. Wardens especially seem to delight in assists from giving teammates buffs or armor or straight up healing them. Tahm Kench has a goddamn evac ability. Taric makes people invulnerable. I could go on. My arguments for the Vanguards is stunning people counts as assists. Lots of effects like slow, stun, knocked up, grounded, marking are shared between movesets and allow your teammates to play better, either by holding down an enemy so the DPS can punch them, or stopping them from advancing so you can get support down your lane. We're starting to build a clearer picture now of what a tank really is, but there is one major area we still haven't covered. The team-based FPS fittingly titled hero shooter genre really gained prominence with 2016's Overwatch. I will admit, I have never played Overwatch, and I was a little blown over by the amount of differing characters and mechanics, but they do have 12 tanks. HP needs to be explained to be properly understood. It's divided into 3 categories: HP, armor, and shields. Armor is a 30% damage reduction gained through a character or an ability that gives it, meaning that it takes 1.43 damage to reduce a character's health pool by 1. Shields are assigned by character again, but act kind of like Master Chiefs from Halo in that they deplete, but they will regenerate after a certain amount of time at a rate of 30 a second. I didn't, however, know about overhealth. Quote, overhealth is a type of non-recoverable HP that represents most temporary forms of HP in Overwatch 2. It is only gained through abilities. Overhealth can decay over time or immediately at the end of a timer. Enemies receive 50% less ultimate charge from damage dealt to overhealth. Overhealth is represented by a green health bar. End quote. An interesting concept allowing you to heal past your maximum to buff your own max health. This can result in Overwatch heroes sticking around a lot longer than you expect them, just as long as you set it up right. Okay, on to the heroes. In no particular order, Junker Queen. She's got a shotgun, which means medium damage over a wider spread. Her first ability, Jagged Blade, or as I like to call it,
That's a knife. That's a knife.
Throws her blade at the nearby enemy and can be retracted too. It inflicts a wound, which is a damage over time effect that feeds into her passive, Adrenaline Rush. It gives passive healing for every wound you deal to an enemy hero, so it's within your best interest to be throwing that knife around like grievous bodily harm is back in fashion. Carnage is her other ability that generates wounds, and also has the added bonus of reducing its cooldown for each enemy hit. Finally, her ultimate is Rampage. Junker Queen runs forward, swinging her axe above her head and wounding everyone she touches. I've seen Junker Queen described as an off-tank, and I can see it. Her application seems to lie in distraction from the main tank and making sure enemies keep taking damage over time for as long as possible. Doomfist has 2 fists and washboard abs so hard you could grind meat on those puppies. His passive generates overhealth when he hits enemies with his abilities. Seismic Slam catapults Doom through the air in the direction you pick and does AoE damage on landing. Rocket Punch launches Doomfist at an enemy, causing knockback and extra damage if they hit a wall. Meteor Strike is his ultimate, allowing him to leap into the air and deal damage in an area determined by the player. The most damage is available in the center and it drops off quick, so it pays to be good at anticipating enemy movement. It also empowers Rocket Fist on landing, so you get some free movement options immediately afterwards as well. Oh, and he's also got this little pea shooter attached to his other arm, which feels downright piddly compared to his big beefy jacket arm. But, I mean, we've all been there, right, boys? I know you know. Laugh, damn it. Reinhardt is pretty much the textbook definition of a tank. Big man, big hammer, swing hammer, feel powerful. The hammer has a slow swing but hits like a truck when it connects. 85 damage on a hit, which considering most DPS or support heroes have sub 200 health, is crazy. He's got a shield as well, so protecting allies is right up his street, either when pushing or retreating. Speaking of pushing, his charge is similarly nuts. Reinhardt dashes across the stage and potentially pins an enemy, doing increased damage if you run them into a wall. 225 damage on a pin is enough to kill almost any DPS or support hero in one go. Fire Strike gives him a little bit of range if he's defending a point and he can't leave it unattended, or just wants to make sure that everyone feels included in the beatdown. His ultimate, Earth Shatter, is an AoE slam that deals more damage the closer you are to him. With his high HP and shields taking up to a whopping 600 total, Reinhardt is picture perfect. He is, however, incredibly slow, making it kind of hard to move around or set anything up effectively, but they had to nerf him somehow. When talking about characters and suits and nerfing, it's time to pivot to D.Va. Don't Google her. Don't Google her. I'm serious. She's got some standard weaponry doing decent damage. Nothing amazing though. The mech comes equipped with a barrier ability that blocks damage in front of her. While it doesn't allow you to use your main cannons, it does let you use other abilities while it's active, making it a good strategy play. She's got boosters, which can be used for a move speed buff, and can be used for maneuverability or knockback to enemies, making it a useful tool for running back into the fight after dying, or repositioning around an objective. Like Reinhardt's charge, but without the damage benefits. We can't not talk about her ultimate, Self-Destruct. You voluntarily destroy your own mech to deal massive damage, and it can even be comboed with the boosters to launch your exploding exoskeleton into oncoming traffic. D.Va does eject and unfortunately does become the weakest character by a long shot. After zero-suiting herself, she can call another mech whose arrival will also damage surrounding enemies. I've heard this can be used effectively to eject on low health and basically get a free refill with good timing, so that's pretty neat. Zarya is another character I've heard described as an off-tank, and it does kind of show. Her main abilities are her particle barrier and projected barrier, which either puts up a barrier around herself or teammates, which feeds into Zarya's passive, which takes the damage blocked, and converts it into a damage buff for her main weapon. The particle cannon is not great. It's a combination beam grenade launcher, which is just fine overall. It does okay damage, all things considered. I'm sure a proper Zaryan player can make it work effectively. I can't. Zarya's ultimate makes up for it a little bit. Graviton Surge draws nearby enemies towards it, pinning them down to its epicenter and dealing damage to trapped enemies. Great for holding down support or catching a tracer as she dashes by. Zarya is mostly hamstrung by her pitiful HP for a tank. Yes, it's on par with the high-end DPS, but I have to say it, there's a fucking hamster with more HP than this woman, which is kind of embarrassing. Speaking of Wrecking Ball, he is in fact a hamster. But he's got a mech. Wrecking Ball's main application lies in his dash. It gives good speed, good movement opportunities, and combos well into his grappling claw, turning good movement into an offensive weapon. If used effectively, Wrecking Ball can hold a position and splatter any enemy hero within his reach. Speaking of combos, he also has a slam attack, so a 3-button combo that can be used for traversal, defense, or offense. You could call it a rotation. The shield ability he has grants overhealth, which can increase it with each enemy in range. Now you have options for combos, all of which can draw attention and allow you to stay mobile. Wrecking Ball does also have a standard weapon, medium range cannons which are good to spread some damage around while your cooldowns are happening, but no one really cares. His ultimate feeds back into his combo, creating a minefield around his current position. Wrecking Ball is all about getting places quickly and keeping people guessing about where he's going next. And he's cute, which is a bonus. Continuing on with the animal theme, Winston is an ape with anger issues. That may or may not be part of his lore, I honestly don't know. I didn't have time to make this video in a month and also research the lore for every single character, so cut me some slack. Winston's Tesla cannon sucks, I'll just say it. Piddling range, low damage if you can get anyone to stand still long enough. But he does have a one-way barrier he can deploy with high health, so I'll give him that. His jump pack does allow him to get the drop on enemies, and it's fun to use, slamming down on the enemy team with both fists. The real draw here is his ultimate, Primal Rage. Winston embraces his animal nature and goes buck wild, buffing himself with increased speed, knockback, and a free heal. You can just go nuts, if deployed at the right time, slapping people left and right and making yourself the center of attention for the duration. Draw that aggro like a champ, you funky, funky ape. Did somebody say Robot Centaur? Yeah, I didn't think so. Orisa is largely underwhelming. Another piddly main weapon that relies on a heat mechanic rather than ammo. The energy javelin, though, I kind of like it. It does give a mild stun on hit and can pin, and it's a nice finisher that adds a bit of range to her moveset. Fortify gives overhealth and reduces incoming damage, including negating crits altogether and reducing heat build-up in her main weapon by 50%. Javelin Spin is her version of a barrier. It blocks incoming projectiles but also deals damage to enemies within melee range, and gives a speed buff as well. But it all falls apart at her ultimate. Terror Surge is a slam attack which pulls enemies in, gives them a speed debuff and deals big damage. However, it's very easily avoided. Even with the speed debuff, you can just run away, leaving Orisa with a slow charging attack and no one to hit. Roadhog is one I see described as one of the best tanks in the game. And not just because he's roughly the same weight as one. Roadhog has a self-heal, which is nice and useful. It's got a quick cast time and provides long-term healing, which allows him to use other abilities and soak up some damage. It combos well into his ultimate Whole Hog, which allows you to fire with reckless abandon, dealing big damage. In short, heal over time while shredding enemy health. It seems Roadhog took lessons from Scorpion too, because Chainhook grabs an enemy and pulls them towards you, leaving them open to both barrels of your standard weapon, which is a staggering 200 damage per second once you factor in the individual round and shrapnel damage. Last but not least, he also has Pigpen, which is a deployable trap that slows and damages nearby enemies. Sounds like a good rotation to practice. Trap, hook, ult, and heal as needed. Ramatra is trying to win one back for the robots, but unfortunately not succeeding. He does have a barrier, which is nice, high health and good shielding allies as well as himself. There's an aura which slows enemies, so good utility there. His standard weapon, the Void Accelerator, while looking like you're chucking pebbles at people until they die, does a fair amount of damage, provided they stand still long enough and your aim is actually good. Ramatra's gimmick is his nemesis form. He changes from a spindly robot into a big robot with huge arms and pummels the shit out of you instead. Give himself a big chunk of armor and replacing two abilities. You end up doing the same amount of damage with your punches as you do with the pebbles, oddly enough, but I guess you don't have to reload, so maybe it's a bonus. The barrier turns into a block which reduces damage instead of outright stopping it, but it's also easier and quicker to deploy with no cooldown, so swings and roundabouts, I suppose. Ramatra's ultimate Annihilation forces you into Nemesis form, nullifying the cooldown if needs be, and you suck at other enemies? I'll be honest, I don't really know what's supposed to be going on here, but it does 30 damage a second, so it's not a bad drain, especially against some of the lower health supports. All in all, it seems like Ramatra is trying really hard to be a tank, but if we Scooby-Doo peel off his mask, we might just find out that he's a DPS who wants more recognition. Speaking of chucking rocks at people, Sigma has the most infamous rocks in the game. That's your standard weapon. You launch exploding rocks at people and do splash damage. Not a bad standard attack, all things considered. You do get a barrier that you push away from you. I do kind of wish it pushed players, allowing you to gatekeep objectives and free up allies' personal space. But now that I've said that out loud, I realise how OP that is. In reality, it's a good barrier that you can repel from yourself. Kinetic Grasp allows you to negate incoming projectiles and convert them into overhealth. It only works from the front though, and only 60% of the damage gets absorbed into a maximum of 400 overhealth, but it's a nice self-preservation skill. Accretion chucks a bigger rock at people, but this one has cooldown and knockback. Gravitic Flux is Sigma's ultimate and makes him fly while lifting targets into the air and slamming them back down again for 50% of their max HP, meaning it can kill and you get the bonus of moving with it, so repositioning is possible. And finally, the newest hero added to the roster, Mauga. He's got the crazy ability Berserker, which allows him to gain overhealth every time he crits, and why this is crazy will become clear in a moment. This guy has two chain guns, one that sets enemies on fire with repeated hits, and one that crits burning enemies. Makes sense now, huh? They do share ammo, and he does have one of the slowest reload times in the game, but that seems like a necessary sacrifice for guaranteed crits. He's got a dash which activates only in a straight line and ends in a stomp, allowing you to get in close and deal a little bit of damage before unloading your chain guns at enemies. Or perhaps it helps you set up Mauga's ultimate, Cage Fight. Or, I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me. Cage Fight deploys a barrier, trapping Mauga and surrounding enemies inside until either the enemies or Mauga is dead. It gives you a free reload, so if used correctly, completely negates the slow reload time. A further combo can be generated with Cardiac Overdrive, which heals 60% of damage you deal to enemies and grants Mauga and his allies with a 30% damage reduction as well. Sounds pretty tanky to me. Tanks in Overwatch have slightly more in common with each other than they do in League. Not to say they all play the same, but they share similar elements as well. The return of the arm's reach skill is seen here in skills like Reinhardt's dash, Junker Queen's ultimate, even Cage Fight. Some kind of ability to keep enemies close and focused on you rather than on your allies. Some are more effective than others, but most of them at least get you in close, if not also do damage. The ability to generate overhealth is as close as these tanks get to self-healing, as healing is mostly handled by support heroes. Other kinds of buffs to self are available, like Zarya's entire playstyle, buffing her main weapons, or Orisa's Fortify, so another tick in the box for self buffs. Earlier I talked about League champions all having a skill to assist allies with. In Overwatch, it's not quite the same. Some heroes have barrier skills that can also apply to allies standing behind them, which is great. Covering an ally's position for them to reload, advance, or retreat is a useful team ability. Roadhog has Chain Hook, which literally yanks opponents out of what they're currently doing just to stab them in the back. Same with Mauga's Cage Fight. Isolating the opposing team from each other is an acceptable strategy if you manage to take out the support. The other team has no healing, for example. So while there are some scattered around the roster, the main assist to teammates is pulling aggro. Not in the same way you do in an MMO, where you actually pull with a skill, but the mere presence of some of these tanks on the battlefield is cause enough for the team to panic or draw enemy fire. The fact that these characters have some of the highest health totals in the game, except Zarya, lets them take hit after hit and still remain a threat. People will target Reinhardt if they see him, not just because he's big and imposing, but because if you leave him alive, he will become a problem. And the same can be said for all of these characters. The mere act of them being there is a team assist. Could I have said the same thing about League? Possibly, but in Overwatch, and I would assume hero shooters as a whole, the whole perspective is at eye level, or behind the shoulder, and these characters do cut an imposing figure and draw the eye. Ooh, that was a lot of information all at once. Those were the three big genres that I could think of for tanks. But I had a couple of examples that didn't fit into a category, so we'll touch on those briefly here. You didn't think I could make a video without mentioning Xenoblade, did you? Look, it's there on my shelf. There are defined tanks across the series, but specifically in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, you have the Defender class. Once again used to draw aggro away from attackers and healers, Defenders are the heavy front lines that soak up most of the damage. There are 8 Defender classes, which I don't think I need to go into too much detail for, but they are distinct in their tanking styles, with an agility-based tanking with the Zephyr class, to the use of taunts for the Heavy Guard class. In Xenoblade 3, you can swap character classes, making it perfectly possible to have your entire team of 6 be Defenders. Even have them all be different classes if you really want. This isn't a good idea, as you'd all be fighting for aggro, and they're not the most damaging classes, so the fight would take twice as long, but it is an option. Normally you're recommended 2 of each class, so a main tank and an off tank. Chain attacks are a little complicated to explain, but I'll do my best to abridge it for you. During chain attacks, if a defender completes the chain order, you get to activate Back in Action, which returns the character with the highest TP for the next round. In short, the character is most likely to allow you to do boosted damage. Overall, defenders have high health and defense, abilities that let them pull aggro like taunts, or abilities that give faster cooldowns for quicker mid-level damage. I could go on, but this would turn into a Xenoblade video, and that's an idea for another day. Xenoblade hits all our criteria, and I promise I'll make a Xenoblade video at some point in the future. A choice totally out of left field. I'm not sure many of you will remember the 2021 game Hood Outlaws and Legends. There is a tank in that game, the Brawler, or John to his friends. Hood exemplifies one of those online team-based games that doesn't really have a category. You play in a team of 4 as Robin Hood's gang trying to steal treasure from the sheriff while competing against another team of outlaws. It's player versus CPU. It's long dead now, but I did have fun playing as John. Much like how the game doesn't fit into any of the categories we looked at so far, neither does John. He has high health and is the strongest melee fighter for sure, but that's about it. His ability does give him a self-buff by giving him infinite stamina, and he does carry the chest the fastest, which makes him the obvious target for taking out. Okay, now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing he does fit into all of our categories if you stretch it. The only thing missing is a way to keep enemies near him. It's just not that kind of game, and while you can dash attack players, that doesn't really stop them from running away if they really want to. My buddy Owen reminded me while I was writing this video that Pokemon exists, and there are some Pokemon that people would consider tanky, like Bastiodon. Bastiodon is a Rocksteel fossil Pokemon from Gen 4. Its ability Sturdy means it can't be OHKO'd, and its stat total of 495 is mostly focused into defense. It's a goddamn monster at defending itself, but not really having the ability to fight back when it comes down to it. Learning Iron Defense and Protect through Level Up, and Reflect, Rest and Substitute via TM, or whatever they're being called these days. The same can be said for Cloyster, a Water-Ice type Pokemon, which as of Gen 4 can have an ability that negates critical hits. It has a stat total of 525, which is also skewed towards defense, but only physical. And it can learn Iron Defense, Protect and Withdraw through Level Up, and Rest, Light Screen, Substitute, Endure and Helping Hand through TM. Cloyster is better at attacking and has a lot of utility in battle. It can tank physical attacks like a champ, but being only resistant to Water and Ice types does let the side down a little bit. And there are an awful lot of special type moves out there. Well, what about Miltank, the OG wall in Gen 2, and it's even got tank in the name. Being a normal type does mean it's only weak to fighting, with a pretty decent stat total of 490, mostly skewed towards physical defense and health. Thick Fat for an ability is a nice choice. It reduces Air or Fire type moves by 50%. It can learn Milk Drink through Level Up, which can restore health to other Pokemon as well as itself, and it learns Protect, Rest, Substitute, and Endure via TM. Miltank's stats are middling at best, and normal type doesn't exactly give you the most advantages. I'm inclined to agree with the sentiment that if you had a bad time with Whitney's Miltank, you were just bad at the game. I got recommended Toxapex too, and now I see why. A poison water type introduced in Gen 7 with the ability Merciless that allows it to always hit poison targets, which does make it a threat. With a stat total of 495, it's going all in on defense. It doesn't matter if its health stat is trash if it blocks all damage anyway. It learns Wide Guard, Baneful Bunker and Recover through Level Up, and Protect, Endure, Rest, Substitute, Iron Defense and Pain Split via TM. I didn't actually realise how good Toxapex was until this video, and it shows. It's got a lot of poisoning moves on its arsenal, which coupled with one of its abilities to allow it to hit the target every time. Again, the low HP stat doesn't matter if you can't hit it, and it can hit you every turn. I could go on. I really should talk about other Pokemon like Snorlax, Skarmory, Metagross and Blissey, but it's plain and simple. Pokemon doesn't play like other games. Yes, you make a team, yes there are double and triple battles, but the game itself is mostly focused on one-on-one fights. While there are viable strategies where tanky Pokemon become walls to allow you to hit other party members, or stall the opponent who has a decently matched team against yours, it simply doesn't work the same. However, I was unaware until making this video that competitive Pokemon is all double battles, which kind of justifies the existence of the tank in the series. Knowing this, these Pokemon become much more useful, opening up competitive teams for more viable strategies taking into account their large health pools and defensive and buffing options. Overall, tanky Pokemon are useful. They can buff themselves, they can buff allies, and they have high defense or health, or both, depending on the one that you pick. The only thing they don't get is an arm's reach skill, and that's because Pokemon are always within arm's reach, unless they're using Fly or Bounce or something. I've got two honourable mentions before we wrap up our findings and get back to what this video was actually about in the first place. First, my friend Adam, who I'm making this video in spite of, forwarded me BLITZTANK from BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle as an example of a tank in a fighting game. He's a tank. Like an actual tank. The vehicle. I've looked into it in other fighting games. They don't really operate on the same rules as other games, and there aren't really any tanks in those games. It wouldn't really make sense or work mechanically to have one character designed to draw aggro or assist allies in a genre where typically there's only one member of your team out on the field at the time. Honourable mention number 2 goes out to all the games where you can build your own classes, like Skyrim or Grounded. There are games where you can hop between what other games would define as classes to build your own unique flavour. Sure, there are advised combos, but there's nothing really stopping you mechanically from building a stealth archer who uses heavy armor. As such, they aren't built around making them distinct, preferring to focus on the individual aspects of the game like heavy armor and shields, etc. While you can have tank builds, they don't really count. Alright, so by analysing all these games, we've discovered a few things. In terms of health, tanks usually have a higher health pool than most other characters. This allows them to take more hits and stay alive longer to block as much damage as possible. While it is technically possible to have a tank with low health like Zarya, it's not advisable. While Zarya does have shield abilities, in any other situation you'd have to contend with cooldowns, which can leave you open to get your health shredded by the thing you're tanking against. Having a high armor rating is a possible additional exception. Sometimes you find tanks with middling health but sky high armor. Usually it's both high armor and high health, just to minimize how damaging the damage is that you tanked. I really hope that made sense. Another common theme across the genres we looked at is the self-buff. Sometimes it's as simple as the Paladin's Sheltron ability in Final Fantasy XIV, which reduces the damage the player takes by 15%. Or maybe it's a self-heal ability like Roadhog's. On the whole, there's always some kind of ability that enhances the tank in some way. Is this kind of a broad category? Yes. However, it is vital to the survival of the class. By buffing yourself to heal, take less damage, or in some cases deal more damage, you are prolonging your usefulness to the team. Reducing incoming damage allows you to stay out in the field longer. Dealing more damage allows you to rack up more aggro faster. Whatever form that buff takes is a useful asset to yourself and the team, so for the love of God, use it. In tandem with self-buffs, we have what I'm calling ally assistance. These are the abilities that help other people, the strats that separate the boys from the men. It's not just blocking damage to yourself, spread the love, give some damage reduction to your pals, or maybe heal them first, but that one's less common. It can also be used for buffing your allies in some way, like Heart of Light used by the Gunbreaker, which reduces magic damage taken by self and nearby party members by 10%. A reduction even that small could save someone from a killing blow. Sometimes it's a little bit more powerful, like Tarek's ultimate, which makes people invulnerable for a short time. Why not give the DPS a damage boost while you're getting slapped around by the boss, or make the healer take no damage at all so they can focus on healing everyone else? It might just be the thing that keeps you alive for another wave. Finally, all of these tanks have what I've been calling an arm's reach ability, something to keep the enemy within punching distance. This can be a dash, like all the ones used by the Final Fantasy XIV classes, a tether like Leona from League, or something like Mauga from Overwatch that just stops people from being able to walk away from whatever you're doing. These help maintain aggro focused on the tank, making the enemy fight you rather than your allies and teammates. While not necessarily insignificant, tanks do often have a lower damage output than the class literally called damage per second, so forcing people to look at you is usually more effective than hitting them to get their attention. Not to say damage can't be an important part of tanking. We've also discovered a significant amount of tanks that make it their business to be as imposing as possible in order to grab focus and aggro. Characters like Reinhardt, Tahm, Kench, and John from Hood are bigger and burlier than most other characters. I can see the argument being made that character design does not a class make, but hold on, I'm going somewhere with this. Something I've skirted around for the entire video is the taunt action. Taunting is not found across all examples, something which I was surprised about, but there are a fair amount of abilities that do taunt, usually outside of the player versus player games. It feeds back into what I was saying about the arm's reach ability, something to keep focus on you rather than your allies. While arm's reach allows you to keep enemies close, in most cases they could choose to ignore you. With taunting in the case of games like MMOs, the enemy mechanically can't do anything to ignore you. For those games with big bosses that hit really hard, it's important to draw attention away from your squishier allies so your massive health pool can soak up some hits. Sometimes an instant grab is needed rather than a slow burn or just trapping someone in place. A well-timed your mum joke or simply provoking the enemy in order to save a friend is sometimes needed in a tight spot. It's not something shared across everything we've talked about today, so I can't say that it's 100% a feature of a tank class. It does get a special mention, and I'm making the call that it's an optional feature, not compulsory. If we loop it back to the Wikipedia definition I talked about at the top of the video, we've kind of proved that it is correct, as we've determined that in addition to the 3 points mentioned in that definition, there are also other factors that help define the class further. Good job, Wikipedia. So far I'm counting 4 compulsory aspects and 1 optional. Great, I'm glad we spent however long we did in this video defining what it is so I could get to the whole point of the video in the first place. Okay, so way back at the beginning of the video, I told you about my friend Adam and I playing D&D. For a quick recap, I was worried that by leaving our party I would remove the party's tank. Adam was very confident that his character is also a tank, and I took that as a personal offence, and that's why we're here today. Using everything we've learned, we're now going to analyse both our character sheets and determine once and for all whether one, both, or neither of us is in fact a tank. We're going to start with my character. Arno is a human paladin 8, fighter 4 multi-class character. Looking at the sheet initially, you might spot that he's a little bit light on abilities. This is because, due to plot reasons, he no longer has a paladin oath. To make a very long story incredibly short, there was a situation caused in-game by my own actions that caused Arno to break his oath, and after talking with my DM, we determined that the Oathbreaker subclass was too focused on necrotic damage and outright evil for what I wanted to do and the theme of the adventuring party. So he's currently rocking no paladin subclass, which is why I went into fighter for 4 levels. He will eventually take another paladin subclass when he makes one and proves himself, but that's not important right now. What are important are his stats. As you can see, I've maxed out Arno's strength score and given him a fairly good constitution score, which brings his max health to 112. Not bad. Over 100, able to take hits consistently unless it's a thing bigger than he is or a boss. If we pan up slightly, you get to see his AC is 22. Arno wears plate armor, which has an AC of 18. The set he's currently wearing is a +1 magical set, so 19. Plus he has a shield for 21, and he gets another +1 from the defense fighting style he gets from fighter, so a nice healthy 22 AC. First checkbox marked, high health and or armor. Now how about self buffs? I hear you cry, but Josh, he doesn't have lay on hands anymore. Surely he has no self buffs. And that's where you'd be wrong. He does have one self-buffing skill. Arno's fighter subclass is from a third-party book called The Grim Hollow Player's Guide, published by Ghostfire Gaming. Arno became a Bulwark Warrior, which has an ability at level 3 called Weather the Storm, where as a bonus action you can give yourself temporary hit points equal to your fighter level. Look at that! A buff! It could also be argued that by taking the Shield Master feat, Arno can buff himself by adding his shield's AC bonus to dex saves he has to make, or spells targeted only at him, along with the ability to significantly reduce the damage taken by dex saving throws. I don't know, you can test that in your own minds, but I will circle back to Arno having Second Wind at his disposal, which is undoubtedly a self-buff, as it heals him for 1d10 plus his fighter level. Second tick in the box for self-buffs. Ally Assistance is where Arno truly shines. This boy is built around that. When I first modelled this character, he was originally based on Naofumi from the Rising the Shield hero, and so you've probably noticed that he has a lot of shields. He's got a shield that makes a barrier, a shield that blinds undead with Holy Light, a shield that summons a tiger, and one that levitates. With the exception of the levitating one, all these can be used for party assistance. The Shield of the Guard produces a wall of force that lasts for 8 hours, providing a barrier for Arno and his allies to shelter behind. The Shield of Holy Light forces undead to make a DC 15 wisdom save or be blinded. The Tiger Spirit Shield summons a whole other party member, which I'll admit isn't the most assistance given out of all of these ones, but it is at least cool. On top of the shields, Arno also took Interception as a fighting style as a paladin, which can use his reaction to reduce the damage taken by an ally within 5 feet of him by 1d10 plus proficiency. If we need one more example, he also has the Standard of Divinity at his disposal. It's a third-party magic item from a book published by Kobold Press that when planted in the ground can give up to 6 creatures within 30 feet advantage on saving throws for a minute. Perfect for the trigger-happy mage in your party. That's 3 check marks. Looking good for Arno. An arm's reach skill is where it all kind of starts to fall apart for Arno. He does have the throwing shield, which gives him some range, which is the best I could come up with. It does rely on him making a good enough dex save to catch it when it bounces back, much like Captain America's shield, but his pitiful dex score really pretty much stops that from happening almost every time I've ever used it. It's technically here, but it's up to you whether or not you count it as applicable, and I've got something better anyway. The Bulwark Warrior subclass comes with a taunt. When a creature you've hit since the start of your last turn attacks someone other than you use your reaction to force them to attack you instead. This effect ends early if they move more than 5 feet out of your reach or you become incapacitated or die, and that's at 3rd level when you take the subclass. If my maths is correct, that's 4.5 points for Arno here. He's got all the makings of a tank by my research. With that nicely tucked away, let's pivot to Adam's character. He's very kindly given me access to his character sheet, so meet Amrynn, the Wood Elf, Path of the Beast level 12 Barbarian. Glancing over Amrynn's stats, we can see that he too has maxed out strength and has constitution equal to Arno. Let's gloss over the intelligence and charisma scores and hop straight to health. 129, not bad, higher than Arno's, which automatically gives Amrynn a point for high health. His AC is 17, which again isn't bad, but is outclassed by at least 2 members of our adventuring party, Arno included. His AC is due to the fact he's wearing Mithril Halfplate, which is 15 plus your Dex modifier to a maximum of 2. If he was using unarmoured defense, it would only be 16, so good on Amrynn for being well equipped. He gets points for high health. The AC could do with some work, but he doesn't have that much choices outside of leveling up to the next ability score improvement. Self-buffs. Do we have any self-buffs? Why, yes we do. Raging could be considered a self-buff, as he gains advantage on strength checks and saving throws, a +3 to melee damage and a resistance to bludgeoning, piercing and slashing damage, as can Reckless Attack, which gives him advantage on melee attacks but gives foes advantage against him as well. Amrynn's Pack and Heat with Brutal Critical as well, and Bestial Soul giving him a climbing speed. I have to mention that Amrynn favours the tail as part of his form of the beast, and that does allow him to use his reaction to roll a d8 and add it to his AC, which could have caused attacks to miss him altogether. All good examples of a self-buff, empowering Amrynn to use his skill set to the maximum in and out of combat. Okay, ally assists. The only thing I can find that could possibly count is his Infectious Fury skill. If Amrynn hits a creature with his natural weapons and they fail a wisdom save, he can choose to make the enemy use their reaction to attack something else. However, this requires Amrynn to attack with either his bite, claws, or tail, and I know through playing with him for as long as I have, that Adam prefers to use Amrynn's Greatsword, which is a homebrew item and does way more damage. As this video isn't about whether or not a player makes use of all their available skills, I do have to consider it an ally assist, as it is a course of action Amrynn could feasibly take in combat. It would stop the enemy from being able to use their attack of opportunity, allowing an ally to retreat from melee distance unopposed, so chalk that up as a point for Amrynn. Keeping enemies at arm's reach is Amrynn's impressive collection of weapons. His hand axes and javelins are both weapons with the thrown property, so they can be chucked for a little range damage if Amrynn feels like it. He also has a longbow, which I'm not sure I've ever seen him use, but he has it nonetheless. Amrynn's speed must also be mentioned here. At 45 feet per round, he eclipses Arno by 15 feet. I'm going to put this here as a point towards Amrynn's arm's reach because it does help him keep enemies within slapping distance. Amrynn does not have a taunt in his arsenal. He's got nothing but pure animal magnetism to convince enemies to go after him rather than anyone else. However, this is an optional feature, so it doesn't really matter, just something he could think about adding in future. And with that thrilling conclusion, I can exclusively reveal that both these characters are tanks. Both have high health pools, and while Arno does have higher AC, which gives him slightly more bragging rights, it's not cause to say that he's better. There are plenty of tanks that have high armor, and there are also plenty that have no armor but massive health pools. So while you can say that armor is important for tanks to do their job effectively, it's not strictly necessary. Look at Roadhog, he has high health with no armor or shields and he gets on just fine. The self buffs are also shared between the two. At full power, Arno would have more healing skills and Amrynn's are based more in attacking and dealing more damage, but whatever helps to generate more aggro, I guess. They both have arm's reach options. Ranged attacks can help draw the attention of an enemy from the outset, or deal minimum damage from afar if they can't quite make it close enough to use their main weapons. We've come to the sticky situation of ally assists. It cannot be denied that Arno has multiple options when it comes to this. The sheer amount of equipment he's carrying make me glad we don't play using encumbrance rules, and the feats and fighting styles he's chosen make helping teammates a breeze. The only problem is which one to use in a given scenario, given you only have one reaction around. Amrynn has one too, and while I might consider it personally to be a stretch, Infectious Fury does have the capacity to be of assistance to a party member. It does require the use of natural weapons that are available to Amrynn, meaning that he would have to sacrifice higher damage in order to use it at all, but I have to leave role-playing and character decisions to Adam in the long run. While Arno has a taunt skill, we've determined that it's not the be-all and end-all of a tank, so he doesn't have to have one, so it doesn't matter that Amrynn's lacking one. Although in my opinion it would help his case, especially since when he's raging he technically has double the hit points due to his many resistances. Actively forcing an enemy to fight you is in my opinion a highly useful quality for a tank, but that's a personal opinion and not required by the rules we've established in this video. Alright, so I guess they're both tanks then. Well, in the initial draft of this video I said yes, but then I took a step back. I ran the script by two friends who also play in our group and got the same response. But Amrynn doesn't tank. Which, while true, I told them, as I told you, that I wasn't focusing on roleplay or personal playstyle, just loadouts and skill sets. And then they reminded me that Heroes of the Storm exists. HOTS has 6 classes across the traditional tank, DPS and support roles, and the tank role has the aptly named tank class and bruiser. Bruisers are defined as tough fighters that are capable of putting out some damage. The specific hero I was given as a reference was Varian, who has a playstyle that changes depending on his loadout, either a full tank, a hybrid tank, or full DPS. I also remembered that in my research, in 2016, Riot Games simplified the class system for League of Legends and removed the fighter class. The League Wiki defines the fighter class as durable and damage-focused melee champions that look to be in the thick of combat. Some of the champions we talked about earlier in this video, Poppy, Rammus, Taric and Zac, used to be fighters before the reshuffle. Looking at these two similar roles, we begin to see a distinct class that dishes out damage while being able to take a hit. A class that, while sharing some of the similarities of tanks, focuses more on dealing damage than giving assistance. And this solves my iffy feeling about making Amrynn a tank. Amrynn's build, and therefore general playstyle, focuses more on buffing and protecting himself than it does helping allies. Pure and simple, Amrynn is built to swing his greatsword around like a maniac and rage to increase his damage output. Sometimes this has the effect of drawing aggro from enemies, but if it doesn't, he can simply use his enhanced movement speed to close the gap, force attacks made against him to miss, and sometimes, if he's feeling particularly helpful, force an enemy to use the reaction to attack another hostile creature. Infectious Fury does assist allies, but it's not his main focus, and is added into the Path of the Beast at 10th level with an option for raw damage instead, feeding the damage output of a rage-filled barbarian who wants to smack things as hard and fast as possible. Finally, I can conclude that Amrynn is better described as a bruiser rather than a tank, therefore proving my initial statement that Arno is a tank and Amrynn is not. This isn't just to help me win the argument. Tanks and bruisers are two sides of the same coin. They just have different priorities when it comes to allies. Tanks act as damage sponges and bruisers become walls. Both can body block hits meant for others. It's just that tanks are looking for opportunities to jump in front of the bullet for someone, and bruisers happen to be in the right place at the right time. All this to say, in a very roundabout 20-ish minute long video essay kind of way, that my D&D party will indeed lose a tank with my departure. But they're keeping the bruiser, which, with any luck, takes down an enemy before they have a chance to hit someone else. So I guess Amrynn really is tanking in his own special way. Hey, thank you for watching my video about tanks. I really appreciate it. As you can see, this is being recorded after the fact. Yeah, this video took about a month to make, and it was really interesting to kind of research everything and put it together. So hopefully this might be a thing that I do more of, like a style that I do more videos of. I got a couple ideas, maybe we'll do them, but it'll probably be next year. Sorry, I'm leaving the country. I got a couple people I'd like to thank. Firstly, my buddy Adam for letting me make a video about how he was wrong for a month. So thanks for being such a good sport about that. And my friends Owen and John for giving me a little bit more information and kind of helping me steer this in the right direction and proofreading some of the scripts. I'd like to also thank my friend Pip for proofreading the section about Final Fantasy, because they know more about tanking in Final Fantasy than I do. So it was good to get some feedback on that. If you want to see more content from me, then stick around. There's stuff coming out this year, but more importantly, check out Sassteroid, which is the gaming channel I run with my friends Owen and Adam, both of which I talked about in this video, and that uploads 3 times a week, so go and check that out. It's kind of old school let's play style gaming, so if you're looking for something else to put on in the background, we've got a pretty big backlog of stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. God, you can write like a whole hour-long script of something, but you can't end a video properly. What is wrong with you?